3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
Welcome to Roots of Reality. I'm your host, Ben Baumann, and today I'm going to be talking about Phase 7, the creation of democracy. So going back 4,000 years ago, we have many civilizations occurring all over the world. In these civilizations, new ideas regarding life are beginning to emerge, which would have influence on people all the way up to the present day. This included various religions and philosophies. For example, in India, we have Hinduism, Jainism, and Buddhism. In China, we have Confucianism. In what is modern-day Iran, we have Zoroastrianism. And in the Middle East, we have Judaism, all of which have been influential to the world ever since. And then finally, also around this time, a radically new idea regarding government would occur. And all this began in ancient Athens, Greece, about 2,500 years ago, where in a world filled with authoritarian rulers with absolute power over their kingdoms or empires, in Athens, Greece, an intellectual revolution of government began. The story of this quest for democracy begins with a man named Solon around 2,600 years ago. Solon was an influential government official in Athens, by no means an advocate for democracy, but he created reforms that would start the process towards democracy in Athens. Now, before ancient Athens took this step towards democracy, it was under tyrannical rule by an aristocracy which virtually controlled everything, and this was a constant source of tension and instability in Athens. So Solon issued several reforms to help the poor, such as reforming penalties for debt and abolishing debt slavery, thus creating less burdens on those lower class members of society. Things have changed quite a bit when you no longer have to become a slave just to pay off your debts. Solon would also form the first representative council open to all citizens in Athens. However, though, this would not fully fix the tyrannical practices that were going on in Athens, but it did help give those lower class members of society more power and more influence in government and politics, which eased the tension enough to prevent a revolt in Athens, which is really what Solon was trying to do because, again, he was not a big promoter of democracy. Then, about 100 years later, another influential government official named Cleisthenes would give democracy the final push it needed to exist in Athens. Cleisthenes reformed the tribal hierarchy in society, ending the control of power by particular tribes in Athenian society in Athens, and made various legal reforms creating greater opportunity for ordinary citizens. He also made it harder for government officials to select family members to join the ruling class, which would help weaken the powerful influence of these wealthy elites and their control over the government. Thus, important government decisions would start to be made collectively by Athenian men, who each had a vote in decisions, which was something that had never occurred before in this ancient world. So after detailing this brief timeline of Athenian democracy, we face one major question, and that is, why did Athenian democracy occur in the first place? For instance, all over the world at this time, there were plenty of people that were being oppressed by these authoritarian governments. Athens was not special in this regard. But why in Athens did they create democracy? Under Solon, it makes sense because he was trying to prevent a revolution, but under Cleisthenes, it is a bit more mysterious as to why these reforms were made. Unfortunately, because this is such an early time in the history of Greece, and we don't have great records of what pre-democratic Athens was like, we can't really know for sure, but there are some possible reasons. For example, in ancient Athens, we have two polar opposite types of people with one group dominating all of society's resources and controlling all social institutions. For example, there was no middle class and there was little upward social mobility. Therefore, there was not much of a motivation to work hard, and there was constant tension due to the possibility of a revolt against the government because the lower class members of society were constantly upset about how little influence they had. Thus, democracy could help ease that tension in various ways. For instance, economically, in a state where you have no power and no hope for social mobility, you are less likely to work hard because nothing will change, since there are no benefits to be had from working harder than you already are. This hurts the economy and makes society less productive overall. While under democracy, you have influence and you have the ability to improve your situation, giving you hope and more reason to be more productive. And when you are more productive at your job, the state economy benefits. Thus, under democracy, working hard benefits you and the state as a whole because it creates a system where everyone wins. For example, let's say you're a farmer and you produce crops which the state needs to feed the population. If you have no motivation because you have no benefits of producing these crops at a fast enough rate to feed the state population, then that's going to cause problems for the state as a whole. And the state's going to have to try to find ways to feed the population, which is probably going to cost more money, and it just makes things harder. Now, the state can, of course, try to force you to produce enough crops, but that's not really a winning situation either, because then that can create a situation where people might eventually start to feel like they need to revolt because there's no hope for their lives. Democracy, though, also provides stability, because when people feel like they have influence, they're less likely to revolt, which keeps the country more together. Lastly, in a government where democratic rule exists, people are more likely to be put in positions of power who are qualified, meaning in an authoritarian government, you have people that are not qualified that can be put in positions of power just because of the connections they have. Maybe it's a family connection, maybe it's a friend, or whatever. But in a democratic society where people vote and collectively choose the leaders, you're more likely to collectively select a leader that is more fit to rule, because people overall have a say. And usually a group of people from various diverse backgrounds are better at choosing a leader that represents their needs as a whole collectively than one single person choosing the ruler of society who very well could be completely out of touch with the rest of the society. Thus, as a result of democracy in Athens, society was filled with more ambitious and educated people that were encouraged to improve themselves, which improved the state as a whole. Unfortunately, though, around 100 years later, after Athenian democracy was created, it would be replaced by an authoritarian oligarchy. But the ideas of this democracy would live on and eventually become the most desired form of government in the modern world. This was not all, however, because in this short time period of Athenian democracy, something else happened that was greatly influential, and that was this freedom of intellectual thought. You did not have to worry as much about questioning the government because there is this democratic process of thought amongst all society, which allowed the ancient Greek philosophers to thrive and to come up with all sorts of innovative ideas and thoughts that would be incredibly influential to the world up to the present day. And we're talking philosophers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, all who really, really did well under Athenian democracy. Thus, in conclusion, I think it really is incredible to see how the past can influence society when you're talking about a process that occurred over 2,000 years ago. And I think this should also make us really cherish those who came before us and dared to change the world in hopes of creating a better future. Because without these people that came before us, that set these precedents, that had the will to try to make a difference in the world and to try to leave it off better for future generations, who knows what world we would live in today. So now, I suppose, it's our time to do the same, to find ways to leave this world better for the next generation. As always, thank you for listening to Roots of Reality. Make sure to follow Roots of Reality on social media. If you like the podcast, definitely feel free to write a review. And remember, 13.8 billion years led to you. So make the most of it.